All right, welcome to another Fireside Chat. I'm your guest host, Megan Bergsma, and we have our CEO, Dr. Bill Cardoso, with us today. And for this Fireside Chat, we're diving into the supply chain and chip shortage topic, featuring another guest speaker onto that topic, Dr. Diganta Das. All right. So Diganta, can you please introduce us to what you do, what company do you work for, and any plugs that you want to mention?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, and no matter whenever you are watching this. So I'm feeling very much like a multi-term president with the name of your show. I'm with the University of Maryland, particularly with what we call Center for Advanced Life Cycle Engineering. We are a center that started in 1984, an ominous year, but one of the things that we always point out, centers like ours, we started as an NSF center, and many universities do not stay on for 30 plus years. The reason we are here is because we never dissociated ourselves from the industry. We never tried to go on to become just the people who solve a math problem, just the people who do a simulation. Our input on what we research on come from the industry. And that is one reason we had been one of the first universities, now there are several, who started working on counterfeit electronics as a real supply chain issue. Not just the issue where it's like, well, that's kind of below my academic dignity to go and jump into it. We found real cases, we found the real reason, and we thought it is worth jumping into it with much more rigor and try to bring in different academic and social disciplines into it. So that's why we got into this mode. And I also had been doing a symposium with SMTA for 15 years now, and Bill had been part of that process most of the time. And that has been another one of my yearly time of joy, when in those 3 days, I learned a lot about the direction of counterfeit issues, and particularly the audacious solutions which sometimes people are suggesting, the more interesting and more technology-oriented ones. So that's what I'm coming from in terms of the School of Engineering and our involvement. Things have become a little bit more interesting. When I get the opportunity, I'll probably bring it up, like other scientific community, how they got involved in this discussion.
And this conversation is very timely because it was only last week that you organized the event, the Counterfeit Supply Chain Management event with SMTA. So you're fresh of new ideas, and you can share with us, right, in a very opportunistic of us to be able to talk to you right after. So your mind is fresh with new ideas and new concepts.
Sure.
One of the things that's been I've been very curious about and relates to the uniqueness or the novelty of the current supply chain crisis we're experiencing. Right, we've had crises in the past. We've had issues with memory shortages in the past, the economic cycles that boom and bust, that have created supply chain disruptions. And this one feels different, right? What's your perspective on, what looks the same and what feels different from previous disruptions we've had?
Well, there are, of course, many aspects to it, and we get to see certain things. And in some cases, we develop our opinions based on a little bit of fact, little bit of feelings, and then hopefully a little bit of analytics.
Right.
So one of my immediate thought in this particular case was, well, it's a supply and demand issue. When we are facing shortages that's impacting the lives of everyday people already in terms of prices of certain things, availability of certain things, from pelotons to high-end cars, people are getting the feel. My first thought was, well, we will see a flood of counterfeit parts. That didn't quite happen. Not that it did not happen, but not in the same scale. I've been kind of always tracked what is getting reported in guided databases and ERAI databases. And Fred Shipp in the SMTA conference, Fred Shipp of Navy, did a good summary of the ERAI data. And all of us are a little bit surprised to find we do not see, at least in the last 16, 17 months of when we started from the Corona times, a huge increase in the counterfeit part count numbers. We have seen a big change in the distribution of it. If you recall in 2018, 2019, we suddenly saw capacitors being counterfeited a lot.
Right. Yeah, the MLCCs.
Actually, that has come down. Yeah, that has come down a lot. So the percentage of ICs as counterfeit has gone up a bit, but it's nowhere near to match with the shortage. So here is my opinion. And one of the ways these days counterfeit is happening is no longer just refurbishing, remarking, recycling components. Quite a bit of counterfeiting is happening by making the parts from scratch. For many categories of such parts, the expertise, the hardware, the infrastructure exists, and people can churn out those parts. And we often in industry call them clones. I call them illegally manufactured parts. However, when your shortages are on high-end DSPs and GPUs and microcontrollers, that's not something one can go back and start making them from scratch yet. Not easily. Not without a huge investment and infrastructure. So nobody's going to create a new 32 nanometer fab to respond to a shortage issue and make counterfeit. So that may be one reason we are not yet seeing that kind of an upsurge of counterfeiting to take advantage of the shortage. Although we are seeing a different kind of thing, that is cases of outright fraud. And in the SMTA conference, Richard Smith of ERAI, he kind of cataloged the numbers of complaints and things that he had been seeing from the distribution supply chain. People are claiming to be sending something, never sending, or lots of wire frauds, prepayment demands and not delivering the right items, and completely different items just in a shipment. That's a different kind of thing. It hurts the industry, it creates problem, but it's not the same thing as new episodes of counterfeiting. So, but another thing that's happening on the side, although that matters for relatively smaller part of the supply chain or demand cycle, are really international relation, foreign policy type of thought that, okay, we need to dial back on our decades of globalization and try to do things more at home. And in this case, more at home being US. Of course, similar thought might be going on in other parts of the world too. And there are some strong actions being taken, sometimes by the US government, even in action, not just policies or thoughts. For example, there was an attempt by a fab in China to buy some latest litho equipment from ASML, which the current administration actually stopped that sale. So it's not just empty talk. Things are happening even in terms of making those decisions. But we are not in a short term ready to be just completely making everything at home, even for just a narrower military purpose equipment. So that's another piece that's happening on the side. I welcome the idea that we need to be investing more on industry, high-tech industry in the US, and hopefully we succeed. But that's not going to be solving all of these issues in the next 5 years. It's a longer-term project. We let things slide in one direction quite a bit. Maybe you have to pull back a little, but without going overboard.
Yeah, I think when we discuss reshoring, especially when it relates to microelectronics, that conversation has to be from a generational perspective, right? because not only we need to discuss the investment in infrastructure, right? It's a building, equipment, machinery. We're talking about education, right? Of a generation of people who can develop the technologies and make those things work, right? And that's a workforce that's, I mean, you are University of Maryland, one of the top schools in the world, one of the best engineering programs. What's your perspective, right? What it's going to take to form this competent and specialized, very specialized workforce?
It's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For years, at least in our graduate program, this is anecdotal. This is not a global view.
Correct.
We have been trying very hard to recruit students who domestic student, US students, but we still have to rely on a very international body of students. Now, I do not see it as, of course, I coming from the same background, it's probably not surprising. I do not see that as a problem. So one of the things I would say, yes, we need to build up the ability to get a lot more people interested in this direction, not just the engineering part of it, but the science, math that goes behind it. But we cannot actually get there by cutting off any sort of political decision that we will not accept students from place X at all. Those kind of decisions will hurt us even in short term, forget long term.
Yeah,
I'm very aware of the kind of things that people are concerned about regarding some cases. Maybe people are coming in with the interest from the very beginning, not really to contribute to the education directly, but to get the technology and move on. There can be other ways to control that, but a blanket kind of decision that we do not want to have an international input into our science and technology education and training will not help us with the reshoring. Actually, it may even hurt us. Even for the purpose of those students who are coming from different places, we need to really, it's a very awkward thing. It's not the topic I wanted to go. We need to make them feel welcome. We need to give them the options of and rewards for doing the right thing and contributing to the technology. It's actually, sometimes it's not the government policy. Sometimes it's the way private industry reacts. So that's all of that will be continue to be necessary for it. But beyond that, certain things I'm seeing happening in from high school or other level. I know IPC is trying to do a lot of work on investing from high school level to get students interested in. I'm personally aware of a program which is several defense companies, particularly Lockheed Martin, put together a engineering from freshman year in high school program where people do 4-year things and go on. So one of the problems there are, and which is an overall societal issue that we all face, as far as I know, I took a look at it. So in many cases, those programs are available only in these upper income suburbs, like where I live in, and not the whole broad area. So it's reaching to the students who would have already gone into science and technology without that.
Exactly.
Influence. But we are not expanding the pie. We need to be thinking more and going to the places where we can reach people who will be excited, who are not reached right now. So we have to get that there to increase our manpower input.
That's absolutely. No, I love you touching about this societal issues and overall engagement. I wanted to bring back to the topic of one of your workshops on Thursday last week, and I'd like you to tell us more about this NSF project you have. Because the fascinating thing about to me is these bigger picture thinking about counterfeits and how, you're talking about polycrimes, which was a new word for me.
Yeah.
And how
it's new for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I really like this root cause analysis, right? Really to try to understand how these things happen and what we can do to actually solve them going forward, right? Why don't you tell us about this? Yeah. What are you doing for NSF now?
So NSF has one group which had been looking at kind of supply chain and its disruption for last several years. Mm-hmm. And for all this time, it really worked on and funded work on arms smuggling, drugs, human trafficking, and made good contributions to it. However, from like 2.5 years back, I would say first time they kind of came up, okay, let's engage some universities to look at the supply chain of counterfeit electronics and see where it all fits in. So one thing that they said and they did, and which was, I really appreciate the thinking of the program managers and agency there, that they kind of made it a point. You guys cannot just put in 5 engineers in a team and tell us more about how to detect counterfeit parts. We want you to think beyond your comfort zone, involve people in policies and criminology and other kind of trafficking cases, and come up with a way of identifying places where a government policy or a company policy can make the most difference. So what we are doing in our cases, Professor Peter Sanborn and myself, both of us from engineering, we have Professor Bill Swin from public policy, and others from centers within the university who deal more with, in the past, terrorism, but also human trafficking and other sociological issues. So the idea is, what incentives or what opportunities work for stopping somebody to engage in criminal activity and move on to more legitimate activity, and taking similar kind of thought with counterfeit decisions. So let's think of in a simple way in counterfeit related issues, just matter of policies, either as a company policy or as a government policy. Mm-hmm. So all of us at some point have excess inventory. Right. And I'm talking here about legitimate companies who have to do this. So that excess inventory, if I just say, well, I care about who I buy from, not who I sell to. If I just choose to dump them to anybody who would give me the highest dollars, I may be providing raw material for somebody to do counterfeiting on those parts. On the other hand, if I take a decision, I'm never going to sell my excess inventory to anybody who look remotely suspicious, I may have to take a hit. I may have to just junk those parts, or I may have to sell them to somebody who is going to be paying pennies on the dollar. Right. Now, in that balanced position, what's the role of a policymaker? Should the government create an incentive structure for companies not to dump? Should the companies be saying, if certain types of technology, particularly technologies related to security or other issues, cannot be sold to certain people? Those are not easy decisions, particularly in a free market economy. So we believe our network model that we're creating is called agent-based model. Mm-hmm. So everybody who has a role to play is an agent. And the idea is, again, talking about free market, each agent behaves independently based on its own cost and profit function. Correct. They may be defining the cost and profit based on certain parameters. Those definitions of cost and profit may come in and change due to government policies or societal policies or adoption of certain standards. So that is where we want to see today. Okay, if I introduce shortage of a particular type of component or a shipping blockade in a certain part of the world, which connections between the agents kind of becomes the red zone where we can intervene to stop counterfeit products from coming in. And what we are hoping is, particularly with the involvement of other sociologists and criminologists, we'll find similarities and differences on how maybe an arms trafficking versus component trafficking versus even the worst kind, the human trafficking, work, and what tools and methods can be used for all, what can be learned from each other. So we did a workshop, as I said, on supply chain and tracking and tracing and even government policies last week. We are doing another one in October, which is specifically on what our sociologist friend Marcus in this team called polycrime, that different types of people may come in together to do different kind of economic activity. I'm calling it economic activity almost as an euphemism. Sometimes
Exactly.
It's crime. But if we think of giving one example, maybe one criminal gang specialty is crossing international borders, and they don't care what they are crossing with as long as they get paid. Now, if the counterfeit electronics, for example, is coming from a different source, they have to cross a certain border. They may be employing the same kind of people who might have been carrying something else in the previous years.
So what I can tell, polycrime is nothing but the diversification of your sales channels, right? That's what we call it in the business world. Now, Diganta,
So I'm very excited about it, that we really, sometimes we engineers think in a somewhat narrow manner, as if we can find the right setting on ACM by which I can find the surface defect, that's the way to go. But that may give me professional satisfaction, but that's too late.
Exactly.
That's too late. If I buy a reel and then take it from reel to reel and have to check every part in an X-ray machine, that's cool when I find something and not let it go on a board. But it has already traveled.
Exactly.
Literally made hops through the supply chain, and a lot of people have paid for it. A lot of money is wasted. So if the earlier we can catch, better it is.
Talk about the many hops of the supply chain, right? I mean, from a regulatory perspective, I mean, one of the ways that governments and the state can play in that cost-profit equation that business make on a daily basis is by including fines if bad behavior is executed by a business, right? That's how you can tip that profit cost, the profitability equation. You can tip in the other direction and avoid bad behavior by businesses, right? Now, in this global ecosystem of parts moving all around the world, the regulatory reach that we're discussing here is the United States, right? And are you thinking about how perhaps overly punitive to American companies can be, while perhaps the impact's not going to be as great as if it was done in other countries or in a global perspective? Ideally, if you do this to every company in the world, then you can just solidify this ecosystem, right? And provide the right incentives for everyone. But in a world where you can't, how this, and I'm sure that the people we're working with, they've discussed that for human trafficking and arms smuggling and drugs, and because they all have the same problem, right?
Mm-hmm. So we cannot completely separate, though, although we can do only what we are doing, but we need to stay in top of what others are doing. Let me start with an example. So we have seen like the National Geographic documentary on recycling of electronics, how damaging it is to environment in different places, or we have seen pictures of things happening, particularly at some point in China. One of the difference, we don't see as much of the recycling electronics issue today is one of the reasons, particularly the two biggest places, both in China and to some extent India, they have moved up in the value supply chain. Mm-hmm. That kind of cheap action of refurbishing and straightening up, retaining up lead, it's not where they want to be.
Well, we've seen also that you see companies that really go for the bottom line labor moving out of China, moving out of India, right? Because those countries don't offer.
Are expensive now,
Exactly. They have a growing middle class, right? and
So
people are moving up. So
that's one of the places where a policy or economic development position at a different country does impact us. For us, particularly in kind of relationship with this network model we are thinking about, we were considering what will be the impact of number of prosecutions of counterfeit electronics related issues, what will be the impact of types of punishment, what will be the impact. But unfortunately, if I can literally count how many, at least openly talked about prosecution have happened for counterfeit electronics in the last 10 years, I can tell you it's less than 10. There may be other plea bargains which we never came to know about.
Yeah.
Now, most companies who are taking part in that activities will make that judgment on whether or not to take that risk and what kind of component they can take the risk on.
Yeah.
Some of the cases that we have heard from, particularly in the symposium, people coming and presenting, had to do with quote unquote military semiconductors. But impact on economy can be for any types of semiconductor. But of course, for whatever reason, actually we know the reason, that's where the resources have been put in. Most of the impact had been taken on a few cases of people trying to sell some counterfeit military electronics to military programs, such cases. So just the sheer number of it may not be there yet to make sure that people are saying, okay, there will be a consequence if I do that. Now, one of the reasons I say that NSF did a great job in trying to think of, let's check this. We cannot run this public policy as experiment. We certainly cannot say, okay, DOJ, you go wild, prosecute everybody you have heard about. We want to see, at least in our model, what the impact will be. That is, if when cost of doing this will be at such a level that it will be less attractive for somebody to do counterfeiting, they might go into a legitimate refurbishing business with the same skill set.
Yeah. So it's all about shifting that the equation, right? That's the end.
Shifting the equation now, and we have talked about this many times, that much of the enforcement activity, even for the National IPR Center and all, are for protecting our shoe brands and handbag brands.
Yeah,
I have nothing against those. Those add a lot of value to our economy. But at the same time, we need to bring the idea of how important the semiconductors issues are, and to bring it. Maybe there will be relation with this whole reshoring business. If we are making things at home, maybe we'll have more interest in protecting that than what the situation we are on now.
Yeah, and I think the automotive plants shutdowns and shortage of cars and other equipment has brought to a bigger audience the importance of semiconductors and the importance of the supply chain in our daily lives, right? But I know we are, and by the way, I had a whole page long of questions to ask you, and I asked you one question, the whole page. So I think we did really well. That's usually a good sign, when I can go through more than one question that I had. But a question that I often ask, and I'd like to ask you as we wrap up here is, imagine Diganta, a 20-year-old Diganta, right? And now, but it's a special 20-year-old Diganta because he knows what you know now. What profession, what career would you choose?
Did you notice what we talked about?
Yes.
We didn't talk too much about engineering. I would not give up engineering. I learned so much from this trade. But I wish we could keep our way of, that's a lot of today's kids do. They are much more risk takers and thinkers, of an element of a public policy or a human history from the beginning, so that that's not something I'm just dabbling into time to time, but take it as part of my profession and keep it as something where I can make more serious contribution in that direction.
So it would be
So
Dr.
that would
Diganta
be-
Das, engineer / sociologist.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have. I wish that I had that risk-taking ability to, and the demand that would have made on my time and preparation at that time, so that some of these things where I'm giving opinion, and which I believe are informed opinion, but there I would be more rigorous and knowledgeable rather than just based on anecdotes and information that we come about. That would be one of the things. And I'll be happy to come back to go through your second page another day, another time.
Well, actually, second question. It's the first page still.
Okay.
It'll be a part one of a continued series.
Thanks so much.
So what you see in my background is our university's what's called quad in most universities. We call them a Keldin Mall. It's beautiful, but somewhat empty even now. We hope to be back in full scale. We thought from the beginning of fall, but it looks like it will be later in the fall when we be full-fledged back in action.
Well, stay safe, Diganta.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Diganta.
We'll talk later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.